Okay everybody, welcome to episode 8. We are going to talk arrow cresting. The lines that we put in the shaft in between the transition of the crown dip and the body. Or you can just do it on a regular stain shaft. I'm going to go over some of the tips and tricks that I use, the types of brushes, types of paint and equipment. And we'll see how this turns out. It's kind of tight quarters back here by my cresting bench, but stay tuned and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so here we are at my cresting bench. It's kind of tight quarters. This is set up in the corner of my finish room. I got my arrow dip rack here right behind where I showed you guys when I was doing all the crown dip in the previous episode. But some of the things, I'm just going to kind of go over some of the things I have on my bench besides a mess. First off, I have this little rack that I use for starting to store the arrows. So these are the orange ones that we did in the previous episode. They have been sealed 3 times and they're dry and they are ready for some cresting. So we'll start working on these. And I put them up in the rack here so that I have easy access to them and can start cresting them. The rack will hold a lot of arrows. I don't know exactly how many, but I'll also put the other arrows on there to dry. So once I've crested them, usually only do one color at a time, I'll stick them up in the rack so that they'll dry. Your other option is to make a little rack like this. Basically all I did is, this is a piece of scrap oak that we had left over from the cabinet shop. I drilled a bunch of holes in it and then I cut it in half in the table saw, and so it left me all these little lines. This will hold 12, it'll hold a dozen. You lay that on the table, and then as you're cresting, you can lay the arrow down with that over the edge and it'll keep them from rolling around. And the important part is to keep the crest off of the table or off of the surface so that it can dry. I use this for a long time, but now that I have this rack, it'll hold more arrows and I can do more dozens at a time as I'm going through to pump out some arrows. So that's my drying rack. I use the spin right crester. I've tried a lot of other different models. I think this one is the absolute best for wood because of the way it's designed with the multiple rollers that you can move around and with the spring load on that. If there is just a little bit of wobble that you can't take out with your hand on your shaft, you can move these rollers around so at least the portion in between the rollers where you're going to be cresting will stay nice and smooth and you can still get those fine lines. There are a lot of other models out there. A lot of them are end driven to where you'll put the knock or the tip in and that's how they drive the arrow shaft to turn around. They work great if you're doing carbons and aluminum, stuff that's absolutely straight. And honestly, they'll work good for 80 to 90% of the wood that is straight. But every once in a while I'll get one with a little wobble that I just can't get out, and this will take that up. And then because I tail taper a lot of my shafts where they're going from 11/32 to 5/16, this will also compensate for that. So the guy who invented this, his name's Dan. I think he's got the best one out there. So give these a try. If you're going to buy a cresting machine, I'd spend the money and look at this one. You won't regret it. It does take a little bit to get used to using, and I'll do that in another video and just concentrate on how to set this up, because there is some tips and tricks on using that. In the meantime, if you're having problems, contact me and I'll try to help you out. This is an old rack for a Keurig that I recycled. We used to have a Keurig machine, and we went back to a regular coffee maker because I drank way too much coffee and those little cups are expensive. But anyways, this is where I store all my paint, my brushes. These are old business cards that I draw the lines on so that I can put the patterns, and I just tape them up onto my cresting machine here so that you can get a consistent design across all 12 arrows when you're working on the dozen. A little bit about the brushes that I use. I do use these, they're a 1/4 inch, kind of a flat and narrow brush for when I'm doing the big bands on the crest. So When I'm doing a big band, a 1/2 inch or longer on there, like I did on these red ones, I will use those bigger brushes because it makes it quicker to put the paint on. You don't have to. The one brush, if you're only going to have one brush for this is what you're going to want. You're going to want a liner brush. This is how I get the real fine lines with these liner brushes. You want a relatively soft bristled brush so that it will follow the surface of the arrow and allow that cresting machine to pull the paint off. That's the other thing we should talk about is there's a lot of these models that are variable speed. I really haven't seen the need for them. The spin right spins just fast enough for it to pull the paint off and go around the shaft where I want it to, but not so fast that it'll splatter or deviate the paint at all when you get it on there, because you want to put your paint on kind of thin so that it'll give you a nice coat, a nice line. Those 3M pads I tell you about, a lot of this stuff you want to give the paint some surface to grab onto, or some teeth. So I will knock down the gloss even on arrows that are crown dip, like this is that crown dip white acrylic. Before I crest, I will take this and rub that on there and just make it dull. That puts little micro, I guess, scratches in it that are going to get taken up by the paint and the clear finish after that. I'll wipe them off, and that's what I'll do before I start cresting on them. The other thing you'll notice is that when you go to dip an arrow like this, they will develop a little nipple and stuff where the paint was dripping off. I always will pop that off so that you're actually resting on the shaft. And I'll show you when this goes into the cresting machine, it has this stop here on this side. You want it to be at a consistent spot, because if you leave that drip on there, some of those drip surfaces or whatever, the length of that paint can vary at times, and then you'll put your lines at different spaces. You should be able to take all of your arrows, put them at the same spot, and have all of your lines match up across all dozen. And that's kind of what sets, I think, a good looking set of arrows apart, is they're consistent across all the dozen. All the feathers line up, all the lines line up, and other than that, it's just picking a nice color that'll accent the color, the look that you're going for. Other things to have, you need to have, so I use enamels and acrylics. When I'm using a water-based acrylic, the brushes just clean up with a little bit of water. You can put a little bit of soap if you want, but let's talk about the paints I use. So I will use the actual boning acrylic. A lot of times the pink, the orange, and they got a cool purple that my daughter really likes. I have stuff that I've custom mixed. This is kind of like a metallic blue that's again water-based acrylic. But I will also use a lot of the little testers enamels because they're quick and easy. But I do custom mix those. I have a custom purple that I mixed up for a customer, and basically I just get those and I'll put different drops in and play with them in different colors. They also, Model Master, I go through a lot of silver for accent, so I buy the silver in the bigger jars. And so as long as you test your paints and they're all compatible, this will work. So the one thing I've learned is if I crest testers or an enamel, I cannot dip over that with the oil-based finish that I use. You have to dip over it with a water-based acrylic, because that oil-based finish will make that run. Even though even if you wait, 48 hours for it to dry, that oil-based finish will just pull it off. The flip side is it looks cool because it kind of makes it drip and move, but if you're looking for that fine line, it doesn't work. So that's why I'll dip over the crest and the crown in a water-based acrylic. Once that water-based acrylic dries on there, then you can go over the top of that with oil-based, but it will yellow that a little bit, so you got to keep that in mind. Okay folks, so the first step we're going to do is we're going to remove the dried finish that's on the end of the arrow. So I cut that little nipple off with a sharp knife, or you can use your fingertip if you got fingernails. And the reason we want to do that is that drip can vary in length, and we want a nice consistent line across all 12 of our arrows, or half dozen if that's what you're working on. So you can see here on my crester, the arrow rests on that stop, and if I don't cut that off, I'll have various lines on those arrows. So you can see here I have my pattern laid out. The W stands for white, the G is for green, and the B is for black. So I start with my white paint first. Usually just pick a color, and you got to let it dry in between going to your second coats. So one thing we want to note here, when you crest, you're not only cresting for color, but you're cresting for texture. So as I'm putting on that band, I am taking my brush and trying to smooth it out as well as turn it completely white. That is sometimes what catches a lot of guys when they go to crest an arrow, is they're just trying to put on the color and they're not paying attention to how that band looks. The other thing I want you to note is on my brush, when I go to start my crest, I will dip it in the paint and then I will wipe one side of it off on the jar. And so when you see when my brush enters a picture there, the side to the left is clear or has been cleaned off. And that's how I get my line on the end there. So it allows me for more control when I start to put the line on the shaft. Now I'm not too worried about getting a fine line on the edges here, because I'm going to come back through and put the green and the black on, and as I get on to those other colors, I'll definitely pay more attention to that line so I can get a nice crisp, clean looking cresting mark on here. You can see here where I'm adding just a little bit more paint on there. You could tell that it was white before that, but now I'm putting enough on there so that it'll gloss over and give me a nice solid looking band on there with that. And again, this is that script liner that I showed you earlier in the video. Okay, so now that I have the white all painted, I will hang these up so that the white will dry. Now this is my biggest trick I want you guys to take out of this video, is how to get that knife edge on this brush. This is that script liner again. I've dipped it in green in the paint, and I smash it in a paper towel or a Kleenex. What that does is it gives me a nice knife edge on that, as you can see as I turn it there sideways. That is how I get my fine lines when I'm cresting, especially when I'm doing accent colors. So keep that in mind. You just dip a little bit of paint and smash it, and it'll give you that nice flat edge for putting paint on, but then it'll also give you a knife edge for when you come back and do your detail work for your lines, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit later when we put the black on. But here I am starting with the green. You'll notice again that I wipe one side of the brush off so that I have the drop of paint on one side of the brush, and that is the side that I will always point towards the center or towards where I want the paint to go, and that's what keeps me from getting or mixing the two colors, so I won't get a whole bunch of green over on top of that white band that I've already established and got dried. So again, I am painting for not only color but texture. You can see for the most part, I know that the camera keeps trying to focus on my fingers, and that's why it's kind of going in and out of focus. I apologize for that. But what I'm doing is I'm going back and forth on that so that that green band is nice and smooth. There's no ridges, and so that way once the arrow is dry and cured, it'll be nice and smooth there, and you can run your hand over the top and you won't feel any bumps or ridges from the paint. Again, we'll finish this up. I will allow the green paint to dry, and then we'll come back through with our black color and finish up the crest. Alright, now the green and the white paint have dried, so now I'm going to put the accent color on. We're going to use black for this. So I have smashed the end of the brush like I've showed you before with a paper towel. Dipped it my black paint, and now I'm going to use it on the knife edge here, and I'm going to start putting in the lines. Now, one thing I want you to notice is that in order to make my line thicker when I'm doing this, all I do is I don't move it side to side. I actually just put more pressure up against the shaft, and the bristles themselves will make more contact and widen out themselves. So I start with a real fine line, and then it's just a slight pressure where I push in up against the shaft to thicken it up. Now here, when I'm putting in the 2 center accent stripes, I am just purely eyeballing it. I am trying to put that brush right there in the center, or just off to the center, because I'll come back through and I'll do 2 lines on it. Takes a little bit of practice, but after you do this enough, you'll find that you can kind of blow right through these and get your accent stripes done. So now here, when I'm going to do the wide band in the side, you'll see where I start in the middle of the band, so that because I had a lot of paint on, and then I will feather that paint out to the edges so that I get a nice crisp clean edge, because this is going to be my final paint on that edge, and I'm not going to come back through and put an accent stripe on it. So this is where I have to be a little bit more careful when I'm setting the edges on the colors on your final bands there. And I find that black and silver lend themselves very well to doing that. So again, even on this other side, I started in the middle. Now I'm feathering it over towards the white and then towards that outside, so I get a nice clean edge on that. Now I'm just going to put in the final accents. I was noticing that center, 2 center stripes are on the right were a little thin, so I come back through and just touch them again and bring them up to the same thickness as the ones to the left, and so it gives you a nice symmetry across your arrow there. Okay folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode on arrow cresting. I'm going to end this video by showing you some of my latest work on the wood arrows I've been making. If you get a chance, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you like about the series, and let me know which one of these cresting designs you like the best. It's always nice to get some feedback from my viewers, and I really hope you're enjoying this series as much as I am making it. I hope you'll like and subscribe to the series, and stay tuned for the next episode.